Hi, everyone. Welcome to our webinar. Today, we'll be talking about supporting your transition to API v3, and we'll be doing a deep dive around the changes with the new API version. We'll be walking through the dev docs a little bit, and then we'll end with kind of a rough timeline and what resources are available to you and your team during this upgrade. Before we get started, I'm going to go over a little bit of some housekeeping. So you'll notice two things in your Zoom console, a chat box and a Q&A option. If you see anything that's really exciting or something that's interesting to you, feel free to post about it in the chat. And you just met everyone via the chat and you can connect with each other throughout the training. And separately, if you have questions for our team, please submit those in the Q&A box. We'll be responding to the questions at the end. And then finally, the session is being recorded and we'll send it to you afterwards. So let's move on to introductions. My name is Christina Cruz. I'm a program manager on the partner success team at Clever, and I've been here for about 3.5 years. If we haven't met yet, I'm here to support accounts without a dedicated success manager, and I'm here to support your Clever integration.
Hi, everyone. I'm Tracy, and I'm a partner engineer at Clever. I've been here for close to 5 years, and on PE, I help all of our app partners build our APIs. Really excited that you're all here right before the holidays, and also super happy to see some familiar names. Hi, everyone.
Hey everybody, I'm Samita. I'm our other partner engineer here at Clever, and I've been here about a year. So excited to meet all of you, especially everyone I've been working with and haven't had a chance to meet yet. And thanks for coming.
Okay, so this is going to be our agenda for our webinar today. First, we'll dive into some specifics around the changes in the data with the API version 3, and we'll go over some design considerations that you'll want to be aware of once you upgrade. From there, we'll do a brief walkthrough of our newly released dev docs, and then we'll do a quick refresher on what the certification process looks like, and then those rough timelines for getting all of that accomplished. Finally, we'll finish with some next steps / a mini action plan and have a live Q&A at the end where we'll answer some questions posted in the console. Now, I'll hand it over to Tracy to give the deep dive around the API v3 changes.
Thank you, Christina. So let's just jump right into it. So API v3 will be released in late January of next year, 2021. In this newest version of the Clever API, we created a flexible data model that would meet the varying needs of our many wonderful partners. So here are the 4 major changes that we've made from our previous versioning. First, we have improved support for multi-role users who might be both teacher and administrator within a district. Second, and this is very exciting for a couple of you here, we've made great progress on supporting and better surfacing contact data from SISs. Next, we've added more fields and support for staff users of Clever. And last, we made content and resource mapping available in our API. Now let's dive a little bit into the details around each change. So first, our new data model will support multi-role users. You can think of this as one Clever ID for all users. This updated data model will provide flexible user role data to streamline the experience of provisioning all users at a district needing to create duplicate accounts or support complex merging of Clever records. So here's a sample response of what a user who is both a teacher and staff might look like. It's a little bit small, but you'll be able to see that later in our dev docs. In previous versioning, we had made separate endpoints for teachers and school admins, and now they will appear as one user with multiple roles within the response. So next, we're adding additional granularity to contact relationships. This means that if a contact is a parent to 2 children, also has a nephew in the district, and is an emergency contact for a family friend, They'll have one Clever ID, and you'll be able to see those unique relationships with every single student and easily share permissions for family members who support student learning in your application. So here are examples of how contact data is surfaced in v2 and v3. So previously, contacts were in a separate endpoint and could only account for a single relationship. If a user was a parent to two children, they would show up as two separate contacts within Clever with two IDs. And now with this migration towards a user-forward API, contacts can have multiple student relationships while preserving their one Clever ID. Each instance of this user will be listed as a contact within Clever. So next, I'm super happy to report that we've rebranded school admins to staff. So over time, districts have used the school admin's role type to essentially sync any staff member who needs access to Clever, not just those who need admin privileges. So that's why we're renaming this role type to staff in our API. Additionally, we'll be able to tell you exactly which role each staff member has in Clever, so you can assign these administrative permissions accordingly. So here's a sample response for a staff user type. Previously, districts would upload any non-teacher users into Clever as school admin users, and now all staff can be surfaced within the user's endpoint, and they can be associated with an array of schools. All right, and finally, we're super excited to talk about content assignment. I've personally spoken to a couple of you actually who struggled in old versions of the Clever API to easily assign content to a specific group of classes or users. So now when districts complete these types of content assignments, you will be able to seamlessly ingest this data through the API, ensuring that students have access to the right learning content based on the classes that they are in. So here's a list of all the new endpoints that we've added to version 3 to enable this process. As you can see, you will be able to retrieve all resources within a district and then be able to assign content to all courses and sections associated with it. So quickly, what this process will look like is you, our application partners, will provide districts with a resources CSV that will include the ID and the title. The districts will take the CSV and upload this file to their Clever dashboard and then assign the appropriate resources to courses and sections. And once they've completed this step, this information will be available in the API and you'll be able to easily access these assignments. All right, so while you begin to read up on these new features, I want to highlight some design considerations that will be important for you to think over when planning your build and migration. So if you looked closely, you've probably noticed that in the sample responses that I showed you in the previous slides, a new field called Legacy ID will be introduced for teachers and staff. This will surface the Clever ID that has been historically associated with users in previous versions. Please note that we're merging teacher and staff users based off of email addresses. And historically, we found this to be extremely accurate. Student Clever IDs, however, will be preserved throughout all versions of the API. So this is great news if you are especially concerned about historical progress data. So with this large change in the way that we surface users in Clever, we recommend creating one account for any user with multiple roles. So if your application has separate accounts for users that are both teacher and staff, we recommend associating each account with one Clever ID to allow the user the ability to either toggle between experiences or select their expected role upon login. However, if you must create separate accounts for each user type, I know that there are different limitations based off of each database. You can still create multiple accounts by provisioning them by using the role parameter. Okay, so let's go over some general recommendations to consider when you start thinking about building these integrations. So first, we highly recommend limiting user types in the data access tab of your dashboard. Since users will now all be able to be returned in one endpoint, indicating the user types that are relevant before calling the API will make your calls that much more efficient. So we certainly don't want you to be sifting through hundreds and hundreds of pages of contacts or even staff if you don't process this information. Secondly, with the change from school admins to staff, it is now even more important to ensure that only admin users within a district or school receive these privileges for security purposes. So staff will be differentiated by title. So if you previously granted all school admin users the same access by default, we recommend revisiting how you assign these default permissions with the change. And lastly, with the brand new release, our team is all the more eager to work collaboratively to ensure a great transition or experience. Just as this is your first time working with this version, it will be ours as well. So we definitely encourage you to reach out to our team to engage in a conversation. I personally would love to hear from you all. And with all these great changes, we have some updates regarding our versioning policy. So in order to ensure the best experience for everyone, we are committed to supporting 2 major versions at a time. So API 1 was released in 2012, and with the release of v3, this will be deprecated in December 2022. So if you are still making calls to version 1, and if you have any specific concerns, feel free to reach out to our team and we'll be able to assist with planning. So that will wrap up my section on changes and considerations, but please note that we have much more detail listed in our dev docs that we actually just published and released today. So I'm gonna go hand it off to Samita to talk to you about the best way to access these resources.
Awesome. Thank you, Tracy. So to wrap up, I want to go through some information regarding our new dev docs that cover this new API version. This is your main resource for finding out all information related to our APIs, API v3 changes, and building your integration. Many of you are already familiar with our dev docs and have used them to create your integrations already, but with the new API release, there's a lot of new information here. So it will be really important to go back and read through the new documentation, and we'll review some of the highlights that you should keep an eye on today. So when you navigate over to dev.clever.com, you'll see this landing page. If this is your first time with Clever, you definitely want to create a dev app to get started. From there, you can also read up more on which specific integration you are looking to build to. For the majority of you, you will want to learn more about the district integration, which encompasses our Secure Sync product with full rostering capabilities, and where the majority of the API v3 updates are. Please take a look at the What's New in API 3.0 page to see a full change log describing every new field and endpoint that was added and all fields and endpoints that were removed. This page documents the exact changes to the API as part of the new release. The data model page will be crucial to take a look at as well. With this new API release, there are fundamental changes to our Clever data model that we've reviewed earlier, like the new user data object. This page will help you walk through all of the changes and what the new data model is, with some helpful diagrams as well. As always, our API Explorer is a great tool to use. The Data API has been updated here to display full JSON responses for each endpoint that is a part of the new API version. You can see what the API looks like in action by expanding the preloaded JSON responses on the right-hand side. And finally, when you've completed your integration and are ready to launch, you will go through our certification process. In order to kick off this certification or recertification process, you will need to submit a quick survey at clever.com/certify that answers questions about how you are using Clever data. From there, a member of our team will review the responses and schedule a follow-up call if necessary. Clever's certification process ensures that our mutual district customers have a great experience using your application through Clever and that we are all aligned in terms of how the integration works and what's expected. The notes that we collect through this process also allow us to support our district customers efficiently post-launch. Therefore, for API v3, we are requiring that all customers will need to go through this process before going live with the new versioning. This applies even if you have already or recently certified your application. The majority of you have already gone through this process before. We try to make this as painless as possible to get you set up and connecting with customers ASAP.
Okay, thank you so much, Sumita and Tracy, for all the information. Now we'll go over a rough timeline of what completing the upgrade looks like. So we know that depending on your integration setup, this scope of work may include unique requirements to your application, which is why we want to give you as much time as possible to dedicate developer resources to supporting this important upgrade. Many of you are already working with your success manager around this upgrade. If so, they will proactively reach out to you and your team about your specific plans. For those of you who do not have a dedicated success manager or unsure of who that is, or know that it's me, Christina Cruz, as your program manager, please use this timeline as a rough estimate and plan to follow for your upgrade. So this month, everyone can review the API v3 information in the dev docs. By January 2021, API v3 will be officially released, and then you are able to start building. Please be sure to reach out to our partner engineering team at integrations@clever.com with any questions you might have. In Q2, right before back to school, please plan to submit for certification at clever.com/certify. So that's usually between the months of April and July. And hopefully with all this proactive planning, we hope that you'll be upgraded by back to school 2021. Right after this is the Q&A, so I'll give everybody a couple more seconds to take a screenshot of this slide if needed. Now, we'll get into the Q&A. As a reminder, please type your questions in the Q&A console and we'll try to get to as many as possible. Okay. So our first question here is, what does the toolkit for migration look like?
Okay, great question. So currently we are still building a toolkit for a bulk migration from version 2 to version 3. So if any of you have strong opinions on what you would want that to look like, our Eng team is working on it. But of course, like I said, this is our first time with this major data change. So if you want to give us feedback, I would love to hear from you. And you can write into integrations@clever.com, which I'm sure many of you are already familiar with, and we can schedule a time to speak or we can communicate via email.
Thanks, Tracy. We have another one. Are there any edge cases we should know about?
Great. So in terms of edge cases, all the edge cases that you're probably already familiar with from our previous versions, they're still there. So teacher without any sections, that's going to come up even though the users have changed in terms of the data object. But we do have a list of specific edge cases that we've updated in our dev docs. And so please review them, and if you want to talk through them, I'm here.
Thank you. Which IDs are preserved during this?
Okay, so in terms of the IDs that are preserved, like I said, Student IDs will be preserved. We know that's super important to historical data, progress data with applications. We did have to make that migration over from teacher and staff. So teachers and staff will have a new Clever ID in version 3, and you can use the legacy ID that will be available in that user object to match from previous versionings when you're doing that initial transition.
Okay, great. So we have a written in question from the console. I don't know if Samita, you want to take this one, but in what circumstance, in any, would a context Clever ID change?
Yeah, so the contact Clever ID are changing. The only ID that is going to be preserved, as Tracy mentioned, are student IDs.
So I'm going to hop in there. I think, so contact Clever IDs, if you're talking about changing within the versioning, so contact Clever IDs are actually keyed off of SIS ID. So if that changes within the SIS, that's going to make a change in the Clever ID as well. So yes, they are changing in version 3 in terms of changing within the versioning. That will still be keyed off SIS ID. I don't know if that was the question, but yeah.
Yeah, sounds good. So we have another one here. Will it eventually be possible to assign resources to teachers without using a course or section?
Great question. I see that's from Mel. How are you? So currently that is not in our roadmap in terms of assigning content directly to teachers. That's not something we considered. If that is something that you want to talk about, happy to have that conversation. But for now, it's just sections and courses.
Okay, great. Samita, if you can take this one. When you mention moving legacy IDs from 2.0 to 3.0, does that mean that previous users will be given new Clever IDs unless their legacy IDs are intentionally transferred?
So previous users will, who are students, they're going to have their legacy IDs. As we talked about, the other users will be having new Clever IDs as part of this change.
So to add on to that, so when you say intentionally transferred, so unless you associate this legacy ID with the user and the new Clever ID, when you get a response in version 3, that new Clever ID is going to be a brand new ID. So yes, if you receive any updates, whether you're using our events API, it's going to surface the version 3 Clever ID. So unless you associate both Clever IDs with your account, you are going to run into issues, which is why we're making it a point to have a toolkit for bulk migration or build that into your calls.
Okay, thanks. Let's see, there's another one here. Do you have a standard set of titles for roles, or will they be custom for each customer? Are there any indication of other permissions sent with the role?
Okay, so with this question, so titles for roles, that's specifically with staff. So right now we do not have like a set field for titles just because it varies so much within district. So in terms of assigning permissions, we will say that if there's any type of like admin in that title, you would assign it accordingly. But right now it is just a string that the district can upload.
Okay, thanks, Tracy. Okay, Samita, one for you. Will there be any PHP SDK for version 3.0?
Yeah, good question. So right now we don't have plans to do that, but I'll definitely take that feedback and bring it to our product team as well.
Yeah, so we don't maintain any current libraries. That's been a point of discussion among our Eng team. So if you are reliant on the version 2 of our PHP library, talk to us, but we will not be updating a new version. We will hand you over that Swagger file, so you can feel free to generate your own library, but that's not something we currently maintain.
Okay, thank you both. We're gonna get through to a few more. Keep posting your questions in the Q&A console, and we'll have somebody follow up if you don't get your question answered, but we'll just be going for a few more minutes. So Tracy, another one for you. In addition to contacts having a common Clever ID within a district, what other enhancements are being made?
Great question. So contacts will have that common Clever ID. Like I said, the student relationships are the big change that we're making. So each contacts object will have a student relationships that will return a array of answers. So previously, if you had 3 kind of contact relationships in an SIS, you are a guardian and an emergency contact or a relative, that would come up as 3. So those 3 relationships are getting put into the student relationships of that one user object for contacts. But if you want to go into more detail, that will be outlined in our dev docs.
Okay, thank you. Samira, I have one for you. The same user who is a teacher and admin has 2 different Clever IDs. Is that still going to be the case?
Yeah, so that is no longer the case. With this change, there will now be represented by one user who is a multi-role user who has both the teacher and staff type role type, but this user has one Clever ID. So that is part of the fundamental change that's happening here.
Okay, thank you. And then I'm going to just do one, I'll take this one last one. So the question is, what if our roadmap does not allow for this upgrade by Q2 2021? So, this is just a suggestion to have the best capability, like the best functionality, the smoothest transition and capabilities, for the next back to school. We do recommend upgrading by Q2 2021. If you're unable to, due to whatever reason, if version 2 won't be deprecated for a while, and version 1 will not be deprecated until I think December 2022, right?
Yes, December 2022 for version 1.
For version 1. So if you have version 2.
We don't have any plans right now to deprecate it. I know that the 2 data models are really different. So we would definitely give you a huge heads up if we did plan to do that in the future.
Yeah, so definitely my suggestion is if you can't upgrade by Q2 of 2021, still keep in contact with our team and do let us know when you plan to upgrade. We will be here to support you whenever you do plan to upgrade for that. And, we're trying to give you as much time as possible.
Okay. I know we have a couple of questions posted in the chat. I'm just going to quickly go through that. So Brad, when can we expect Clever IDs to change? Version 2 Clever IDs are not going to change. In version 3, those new IDs will be available when we release API v3.0, and that is late January. And also Nathan, v3, are there any notable changes to the events API? For the most part, it's the same. The biggest difference, of course, will be related to the users. So previously, all events objects were reliant on user type, so students.update, teachers.update, they'll all be merged into users.update or users.deleted. But we have updated documentation in our dev doc, so you can review the objects and take a look. And one last question in the chat. So all teacher staff, will you get a new Clever ID and legacy ID, not just those previously who had multiple accounts? Yes, that is true. All teachers and staff will get new Clever IDs, even though they were just a teacher before or just a school admin before.
Okay, thank you so much. We did run a little over time, but that's all we have for today. Again, if we were unable to answer your questions, someone from our team will follow up with you afterwards. We'll also send out the recording to all the webinar registrants, so just keep an eye out for that. And thank you for joining us.
Thank you
Bye.
all. Have a happy holiday
Happy
season.
holidays.